Chapter 19 of Mary's Grammar by Jane MARCET. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jennifer Dallman. Continuation of Verbs, Lesson 13, Auxiliary Verbs. There are several little verbs which are called auxiliary verbs or helping verbs because they assist us in the conjugation of other verbs. Do you mean the little verbs may, might, should, would, could, which are so much used in the subjunctive mode? Said Mary. Yes, replied her mother, and also the verbs shall and will, which you know are used in the future tense, and let, which is the sign of the imperative mode. In short, whenever a verb helps you to conjugate another verb, it is called an auxiliary verb. And what are the other verbs called, Mamma? They are distinguished by the name of principal verbs. Well, they deserve that title, said Mary, for they are of much more consequence than the little bits of helping verbs. There are, however, replied her mother, two auxiliary verbs of very great importance, to have and to be. They are both so irregular that it is necessary you should learn the conjugation of each of them by heart. Let us begin with the verb to have. Infinitive mode, to have. Indicative mode, present time. Singular, first person, I have. Plural, we have. Second person, singular, thou hast. Plural, you have. Third person singular, he, she, or it has or hath. Plural, they have. Past time, first person, singular, I had. Plural, we had. Second person singular, thou hadst. Plural, you had. Third person singular, he, she, or it had. Plural, they had. Future time, first person singular, I shall or will have. Plural, we shall or will have. Second person singular, thou shalt or wilt have. Plural, you shall or will have. Third person singular, he, she, or it shall or will have. Plural, they shall or will have. Subjunctive mode, if I have or may, might, would, could, or should have. If thou have or may, might, would, could, or should have. If he, she, or it have or may, might, would, could, or should have. If we have or may, might, would, could, or should have. If you have or may, might, would, could, or should have. If they have or may, might, could, would, or should have. Imperative mode, let me have. Let us have. Have thou. Have you. Let him, her, or it have. Let them have. Participles, active, having, passive, had. But what does to have mean, Mamma, all by itself? As it is in a conjunction, I can understand what to have spoken, or to have slept, or to have a cold means, but to have all alone seems nonsense. To have all alone, as you call it, Mary, that is to say, when it is not followed by another verb, cannot be an auxiliary verb. No, to be sure, said Mary, laughing, it cannot help us to conjugate another verb if there is no other to conjugate. Therefore, when the verb to have is conjugated by itself, it becomes a principal verb, and means possession, that is to say, that you have something. Then you should say what it is you have, said Mary, else have is nonsense. At least, added she, coloring at her own presumption, I cannot understand it. Well, then we must think of something you possess, your workbox, for instance, and you may say, I have a workbox. Oh, cried Mary, you mean something that belongs to me, something that is mine. Yes, but you also may possess something that does not belong to you and is not yours. If a thief steal a purse of money, he is possessed of it, though it certainly does not belong to him. And when Sophie left me her doll to take care of when she went to Aunt Howard's, I had possession of it, though it did not belong to me, for you know she did not give it to me, Mamma. She only lent it. I understand it very well, continued she. To have means when you have something, whether it belongs to you or not. As I have Sophie's doll, you have a carriage, he has a horse. Yes, said her mother, the nouns doll, carriage, and horse are things possessed. So you see that, When to have is a principal verb, a noun follows to tell you what is the thing possessed. But when to have is used as a helping verb, instead of being followed by a noun, it is followed by another verb, which it helps to conjugate. Let us find some examples. I have a book which amuses me, and I have read it all through. I have a book, said Mary, means that you possess the book, and have is there a principal verb, meaning possession. But to have read it is quite a different thing, for here, have, instead of being a principal verb and possessing anything, becomes a mere help to the verb, to read. So you see, Mary, that in one case something is possessed, and in another something is done. Oh yes, we possess the noun, and we do the verb. That will be a good way to find out whether have is a principal or an auxiliary verb. When something is possessed, it is a principal. When something is done, it is an auxiliary verb. Yet, Mamma, I have just thought of a sentence that puzzles me. Suppose that I say, I have bought a doll. Does have belong to the verb bought or to the noun doll? To the verb bought, said her mother, which immediately follows it. If you said, I have a doll, then the verb to have would become a principal verb, and the doll the thing possessed. Now, can you tell me, Mary, what part of a principal verb is used when you conjugate it with an auxiliary verb? No, indeed, I do not know, replied Mary. It is the participle, rejoined her mother. And when you say, I have spoken, to have slept, to have danced, you mention the participle of those verbs without thinking of it. So I do, exclaimed Mary. How much grammar I knew before I began to learn it, Mamma. I will now write down, said her mother, the present tense of the verb to have spoken. I have spoken. We have spoken. Thou hast spoken. You have spoken. He has spoken. They have spoken. It is unnecessary for me to go any further, for you have only to add the passive participle to the verb to have throughout the conjugation. But does the participle spoken never change, Mamma? No, my dear. Why should it? It is the business of the helping verb to save it that trouble. The auxiliary verb marks all the changes of time, as I have spoken, I had spoken, I shall have spoken. So the principal verb sits at his ease without change of place or posture, and is waited upon by the helping verb. Grammarians, by means of the verb to have, contrive to make out several tenses in the conjugation of the principal verb. How can you make out more than 3 tenses? Exclaimed Mary. It seems to me impossible, for you know the present tense, that is now, stands in the middle, and all that goes before now is past time, and all that comes after now is future time. Yesterday and last week and last year is past time, and tomorrow and next week and next year is future time. The past and the future time are very long, are they not, Mary? Oh, yes. I cannot tell how long, for I do not know either when they begin or end. The past time begins, I suppose, from the beginning of the world. At least, said her mother, we know nothing of the time that was before the world was created. Well, I think that's quite long enough, said Mary. And then the future time, will that be the end of the world? Oh, no, longer still, for I remember that you said the future time would last forever. How odd it is that whilst the past and the future time are so long, the present time should be so short, should only be just this instant. And now, continued she after a pause, it is gone. And where is it gone to, Mary? Oh, I am sure, Mamma, that is more than I can tell. It is gone by and past, so it is become past time. Ah, so it is to be sure, said Mary, smiling at the discovery, and pleased to see that the present time, which appeared to her so short, was not utterly lost. And so there is no present time now, Mary? Oh, yes, there must always be a present time, while one is saying or doing anything. Then if there is always a present time, said her mother, I should think the present time as long as either of the others. Indeed, so it is, mamma. I did not think of that. For though the present time goes away in an instant, another follows the next instant, and so it always lasts. It is made up of instances following each other. You know that every instant of past time must have been present time before it passed by and became past time. To be sure, said Mary, and every instant of the time to come, that is, the future time, will become present time some day or other. And then, when it has passed the instant of being present time, it will then become past time. I think, mamma, added she, laughing, time goes backwards like a crab. Mamma smiled at Mary's comparison. It is true, she said. We look forward to the future time, and when it comes up to us and passes the crucial moment now, we look back upon it as the past time. Well, Mary, when we began this discussion on time, I was telling you that grammarians divide the past and the future into several parts by the help of the verb to have. And I said, mamma, that I could not understand how that could be done, for when once the time has passed, it can be no other than the past time. Certainly. But it may be past a little while or a long while. It may be past longer ago than something else that has been done since. If I say I wrote to my brother, I know that is the past tense. But if I say I had written to my brother before I received his letter, you know that my writing was longer ago than my receiving his letter. Oh, yes, now I understand it, said Mary. I had written means I had written before something else was done. The future tense, resumed her mother, may be divided into parts in the same manner. I shall write means that I intend to write some time or other, without naming the period. But if I say I shall have written before you set out, it means that I shall write sooner than another event takes place. That is, you setting out. But these compound tenses are too difficult to be learnt at your age, Mary. I merely point them out to show you that you will have something more to learn respecting verbs hereafter. Continuation of verbs. Lesson 14, the verb to be. We will begin today, Mary, said her mother, with the conjugation of the verb to be. Infinitive mode, to be. Indicative mode, present time, singular. First person, I am. Plural, we are. Second person singular, thou art. Plural, you are. Third person singular, he, she, or it is. Plural, they are. Past time first person singular, I was. Plural, we were. Second person singular, thou wast. Plural, you were. Third person singular, he, she, or it was. Plural, they were. Future time, first person, singular, I shall or will be. Plural, we shall or will be. Second person, singular, thou shalt or wilt be. Plural, you shall or will be. Third person singular, he, she, or it shall or will be. Plural, they shall or will be. Subjunctive mode, present time. If I be or may, might, would, could, or should be. If thou be, may, might, would, could, or should be. If he, she, or it may, might, would, could, or should be. If we be or may, might, would, could, or should be. If you be or may, might, would, could, or should be. If they be or may, might, would, could, or should be. Past time. If I were, if thou wert. If he, she, or it were. If we were, if you were, if they were. Imperative mode. Let me be. Let us be. Be thou. Be you. Let him, her, or it be. Let them be. Participles. Present, being, past, been. How very irregular this verb is, cried Mary. Who would ever guess that I am, thou art, he is, we are, you are, they are, was the present tense of the verb to be. If it were conjugated I be, thou beest, he bees, as it ought to be, there would be some sense in it. But the sound, exclaimed her mother, putting her hands to her ears. I cannot bear the buzzing of your bees, Mary." "Oh, you need not be frightened," returned Mary, carrying on the joke. "My bees will not sting you, mamma." "Then the past tense," continued she, "I was, thou wast, he was, is unlike the verb to be as possible." "It is very true, my dear. It is difficult to discover that you are conjugating the verb to be till you come to the future tense, which is regular. I shall be, thou shalt be, etc. Then, mamma, there is the past tense in the subjunctive mode. If I were, if thou wert, if he were, quite unlike again. But the imperative mode, said her mother, which finishes the conjugation, is regular. If you get the verb perfectly by heart, you will no longer be perplexed with its irregularities. Well, this tiresome little verb, to be, said Mary, is the most difficult of all to understand. It is called a helping verb, but I think it only helps to puzzle one, for I really do not know what it means. To be, like to have, might be conjugated by itself, as I have just repeated it to you. It is then a principal verb, which means to exist. But what is to exist? Inquired Mary. Is it to be alive? People differ in their explanation of the word to exist, said her mother, but it appears to me that whatever is exists, whether it be alive or not. That rock lying yonder, Mary, exists as well as you or I, though in a very different state of existence, certainly. Yes, indeed, cried Mary. I should not like to exist like that great stone at all, not to be able to feel, nor to move, nor even to be moved, she added. It is so large. It is true, Mary, that your existence has every advantage over that of the stone, except that it will, in all probability, last longer in its present state than you will in yours. That rock has been there as long as I can remember, and may remain there not only during your life, but for years after. Mary seemed rather surprised at the stone having any advantage over her, and exclaimed, Well, but after all, there is no pleasure in existing in that manner, without feeling. That I grant you, said her mother, but let us return to the verb to be. If you add a noun to it to point out the particular state of existence, it will be easier to understand. I am by itself is rather puzzling at your age, I must confess. But if you add the noun child and say, I am a child, the meaning is quite clear. Thus you may say, she is a woman, he is a man, they are soldiers, we are musicians. Oh, yes, said Mary. The verb to be is easy enough to understand when a noun is added to it, and so is the verb to have, Mamma. Don't you remember how easy it was when we added a noun to it, as I have a horse, he has a coat? But when you say, I am a child, or you are a woman, that does not mean to possess something, as the verb to have does when you add a noun to it. No, certainly, replied her mother, else the two verbs would have the same meaning, and one of them would be useless. The verb to have, when used as a principal verb, means possession, and the verb to be, used as a principal verb, means existence. Now, if you add a noun to the verb to have, it shows what it is you possess, and if you add a noun to the verb to be, it points out how or in what state you exist. That is to say what you are, cried Mary, whether a man or a woman, or that stone there, Mamma, that we have been talking about. Only, she added, it cannot speak and say, I am a stone. No, but you may speak of it in the third person, Mary, and say, that is a stone. An adjective also frequently points out the state of existence, as he is happy, they are wise, we are good. When the verb to be is conjugated as an auxiliary verb, said Mary, I suppose the passive participle of the principal verb is added to it as it is with the verb to have. Oh, no, it cannot be so, said she, interrupting herself. You cannot say, I am danced, I was danced. You cannot say so, it is true, Mary, because you are rather too big to be danced in your nurse's arms. But Sophie is danced, and if she could conjugate a verb, she might say to other children of her own age, I am danced, you are danced, she is danced, we are danced, and so on. After Mary laughed heartily at the idea of her little sister Sophie conjugating a verb in her nurse's arms, her mother continued, And which participle would you use for yourself, Mary, who can dance all alone? Oh, I have found it out, Mamma. It is the active participle dancing. I am dancing. Thou art dancing. He is dancing. And as she repeated the verb, she held out her frock and began practicing the last new dance steps her dancing master had taught her. Look, Mamma, she said, how clever I am, taking 2 lessons at once. You see, therefore, Mary, that you may use both the active and passive participles with the verb to be, while you can only use the passive with the verb to have. Then, Mamma, said Mary, the passive participle has 2 helping verbs to wait upon it, whilst the active participle has only 1. That is not fair. Oh, said her mother, the active participle is such a busybody that it requires less assistance. Now, Mary, find out some examples of the verb to be conjugated with the active participle of the principal verb. I am writing, you are talking, they are fighting, said Mary. That will do, replied her mother. Now for some examples with the passive participle. Mary reflected a little and then said, I am forgotten, you are forgiven, it is broken. Very well, Mary. But these participles all belong to irregular verbs. Give me an example with the passive participle of a regular verb, which you know always ends in ed. Mary considered for some little time before she could think of one. Then several were all at once recalled to her memory, and she repeated in quick succession, I am pleased, you are caressed, she is scolded, they are admired. But Mamma, she cried, interrupting herself, these are all passive verbs? I remember that you explained them to me before. You are quite right, my dear. When I taught you the meaning of a passive verb, I said that instead of doing anything yourself, something was done to you. This, it is true, was an explanation suited to your capacity when you first began grammar. But now that you have made some little progress in it, I may tell you that a passive verb consists of a passive participle conjugated with the auxiliary verb to be. This verb to be, you know, indicates a state of existence and forms an essential part of a passive verb. An active verb may be conjugated without any auxiliary, or it may be conjugated with the auxiliary verb to have, as I have loved, but the passive verb cannot be conjugated without the verb to be. You see, therefore, Mary, of what importance this little verb is, which you thought so insignificant. Indeed, I beg its pardon, said Mary, joining her hands in an attitude of supplication. I hope it will be pleased to forgive me. The passive participle been, continued her mother, may be used as a principal verb, and then it is conjugated with the auxiliary to have, as I have been, thou hast been, etc. We may now, I think, take leave of the verbs, but before you go, let me ask you whether you recollect the different sorts of verbs which I taught you in our first conversation on verbs. What is a verb active? It is a verb, answered Mary, in which not only an action is performed, but that action must be done by some object, as I stroke the cat, I eat an apple. And a passive verb? It is one that the nominative is acted upon, whilst itself remains passive, as I am beaten. But, Mamma, there is one thing I cannot well understand in the passive verb. The nominative is the object acted upon, so the nominative ought to be in the objective case? No, the object acted upon is not always in the objective case, nor is the agent always in the nominative case. If you say, I am beaten, you must be beaten by somebody or something. Suppose that you are beaten by Sophie. She is the active person, yet she is not in the nominative case. In what case is she? Sophie must be in the objective case, replied Mary. And now I recollect, Mamma, you're saying that whenever a noun is preceded by a preposition, it is in the objective case. So, when I say that I am beaten by Sophie, the preposition by makes Sophie objective. You are quite right, and you will be convinced of this at once. If you put a pronoun in the place of Sophie, you would not put the nominative she and say, I am beaten by she, but you would put the objective pronoun her and say, I am beaten by her. Now tell me, what is a verb neuter? It is one in which the action does not pass over to any object, as I sleep, I walk. And what is the principal verb? It is one that may be conjugated without the aid of an auxiliary verb. You are not quite correct, Mary, said her mother, for all verbs require the assistance of some little auxiliary verb in their conjugation. Let in the imperative mode, shall and will in the future tense, and the verbs used in the subjunctive mode to express uncertainty, such as may, should, could, are all auxiliary verbs. You would define a principal verb more accurately if you said that it is one which is conjugated without the help of the auxiliary verb to have or to be. Now, what is an auxiliary verb? Any verb which assists in the conjugation of a principal verb. Lastly, what are participles? They are two words belonging to a principal verb, and they are called participles because they partake of the adjective and of the verb. When used as a verb, they must be conjugated with the auxiliary verb to have or to be. I am very glad to find you remember what you have learnt so well. I have no further remarks to make on any other parts of speech, so I believe, Mary, that we may now conclude our lessons, till you are old enough to learn syntax, a branch of grammar which requires more sense and reflection than children have at your age. But since there are no more parts of speech to learn, Mamma, what can syntax be? It teaches you, replied her mother, how to place the several parts of speech in their proper places when you speak or write. In short, it teaches you to speak and write correctly. But, Mamma, said Mary, I am sure you will not finish without a story. No, replied her mother, I have prepared one for the conclusion, which I think will make you laugh. Mary's curiosity was strongly excited, but she was obliged to wait till the next day, when her mother told her the following story. Sheep stealing. A poor laboring man was taken up for stealing sheep. He was carried before the justice, who inquired his name, and what he had to say in his defense. My name is Noun, he replied. I am a hard-working man. I never stole a sheep or anything else in my life. But as the people who brought him before the magistrate declared that they had seen him secretly carrying away a sheep, the justice committed him to prison, and he was locked up in a cell with nothing to eat but a loaf of bread, or to drink but a jug of water. While he was sitting there lamenting his hard fate, he heard the jailer, with his large jingling bunch of keys, unlock the door, and who should come in but his old and dear friend Pronoun. They embraced affectionately, and Pronoun told him that he could by no means think of letting him remain in that dark, dismal place. I should most heartily glad to be out of it, replied Noun, but it is impossible, for I am kept locked up. I am come on purpose to take your place, said his friend. You must go home to your wife and children, and let me remain here in your stead. Noun was very grateful for Pronoun's kind intention. It is not the first time, my good friend, he said, that you have answered for me in times of need, but I can by no means consent to your being shut up in my place. Mary, who now first discovered that the personages of the tale represented the parts of speech, was very much diverted. Oh, that is excellent, she cried. Pronoun wants to take the place of noun, as it does in the grammar. Well, go on, Mamma, added she, impatient to hear how the parts of speech would figure in the story. Besides, continued her mother, Noun said that the jailer would never allow of the exchange. As for that, replied Pronoun, we are so much alike that we have frequently been taken for each other. The old purblind jailer would never be able to distinguish you from me. Nay, I dare say that if I was to stand trial in your place, I doubt whether the judge would either. Yes, said Mary, a noun and a pronoun are so very much alike. And then suppose that you were to be transported instead of me, continued Noun. I am to undergo an examination tomorrow morning, and though I am innocent, if the people who arrested me swear against me, I may be condemned. Well, even if it should be so, replied Pronoun, it is better that I should be sent across the seas than you. I have neither wife nor children to grieve for me. The mention of his wife and children brought tears into the eyes of Noun. Ah, my poor wife, said he with a sigh. When she hears of the news, her exclamations will never cease. I will accept your kind offer to replace me for an hour or two, in order to run home and embrace her and my children. It was so settled, and when the jailer opened the door to let out Pronoun, Noun slipped out in his stead, without any notice being taken by the jailer. When Noun approached his cottage, he heard sad wailings and lamentations. His wife, who was a weak, hysterical woman, had just heard of his arrest, and she was wringing her hands and exclaiming, "Oh, woe is me! Alas! What will become of us? Oh, my dear, helpless children!" She was sobbing and crying in this manner when Noun entered the house. Her sorrow was then instantly turned into joy, and she exclaimed, "Ah, my dearest husband! Oh, is it really you? Bless me! What happiness!" "Oh, I am sure I know the wife's name," said Mary. "It is Interjection, but go on, mamma. I am so impatient to hear what follows." Her mother proceeded. Noun embraced her with tenderness, and stretched out his arms to his little children, who ran up to him. One climbed on the back of his chair and hung upon his neck. Another crawled all up his knees. The baby cried to be fondled in his arms, and one little chubby fellow crept under his chair and sat there quite pleased, like a bird in a cage. "But what were the children's names?" inquired Mary. "Oh, that I leave to your discernment to discover. What did they do?" "Why, one crawled up on his father's knees, another climbed on the back of his chair." "Oh, now I guess," she said, quite delighted at the discovery. "Up, upon, in, under are prepositions. So the little children were all prepositions." "You have guessed rightly," said her mother, and then went on with her story thus. The neighbors of Noun no sooner heard of his return than they flocked to his house. The first that came were the adjectives, who lived very near, and after them the adverbs, who were not much farther off. When they heard that Noun was to return to prison and to be more fully examined the following day, they all promised to be there to speak of his character. "Oh, I am sure," said Mary, "that the adjectives will say he was a good sort of man, and the adverbs speak well of him too." His wife, continued her mother, filled a basket with the best provisions her cottage contained, and before the hour had expired, he took a tender leave of her and his children and returned to the prison. When he reached it, he asked to see his friend. The jailer let him in, and soon after let out Pronoun, without distinguishing one from the other. The next morning Noun was again taken before the justice. The room was full of people, some who came out of curiosity, and others who were his friends, and came to give evidence in his favor. The witnesses were now called and examined. The justice asked the first what was his name, and ordered him to tell all that he knew of the theft. "My name is Verb," replied the witness. "I am a farmer, and I was hard at work, plowing, when I saw Noun come slyly up behind the hedge, under the shade of which several of my sheep were resting. He seized hold of one of them, and was making off with it, thinking, as the hedge was pretty high, that I could not see him. Upon this I hallooed out in my imperative mode, 'Let go the sheep, you rogue!' He no sooner heard my voice Then he dropped the sheep and took to his heels. I could not leave my team to follow him, so I sent my 2 boys, good clever lads, who were helping me at the plow, after him, to try to secure him, or at least find out who he was. Mary laughed heartily at the idea of Farmer Verb speaking in the imperative mode, and said, "Oh, the boys were the 2 helping verbs, to have and to be." The 2 little verbs were then called in to give their evidence. They looked at Noun and declared he was the man whom they had been sent after. The eldest, who was a strong, active lad, was then told to give an account of what had passed. He said, "When my father saw the fellow running away, he cried out, 'Have at him, boys!' We set off at full speed and gained so much upon him that I thought it would be an easy matter to have him. Indeed, I once caught hold of the skirt of his coat and called out to Toby, who was some way behind, 'I have him,' but he gave a sudden jerk and got away, just when I thought I had him sure. 'Well,' said I shall have him again presently,' and I should have had him before, if my foot had not slipped just as I came up with him. However, I would not give up the chase. 'I may have him yet,' said I, and I might have had him if he had not turned into a wood and hid himself among the trees. So then I sat down and waited for Toby, who had a hard matter to keep up with me and wanted a moment's rest, and having taken breath, I had a mind to be after him again, but the rogue had made clear off. Mary could not refrain from laughing. 'I declare,' said she, 'he has gone through the whole of the verb to have, in the first person, participles and all. I wonder whether Toby will do as much.' 'I think 1 conjugation is enough,' replied her mother. 'Toby, you know, is more a quiet sort of lad. In his evidence, he said that the following morning he met Noun going to his work. Then he set up a hue and cry of 'Stop thief,' and got him arrested. Poor Noun had nothing to say in his defense, but that he was innocent. 'If you did not attempt to steal the sheep,' said the justice, 'where were you at that hour?' 'I was at work all that morning in the meadow by the riverside.' 'That is the very meadow the sheep was taken,' said Farmer Verb, 'so it's likely enough you left your work to steal it.' All this testimony went sadly against poor Noun, and the justice began to think he must be guilty when his friends, the adjectives, came forward and declared that he was an honest, industrious, religious, and well-meaning man, quite incapable of committing a theft. 'I told you that they would give him a good character, mamma,' said Mary. 'I am sure the justice ought not to condemn him.' 'A justice does not condemn a man,' replied her mother. 'He only examines him, and if the evidence gives him reason to think the accused guilty, he commits him to prison to take his trial at the next assizes, that is, when the judges go to their circuits to try prisoners.' 'Well, but now go on, mamma. I am so impatient to know the end.' 'The adverbs,' continued her mother, 'were still warmer in the praises of Noun. They seemed to think that his neighbors, the adjectives, did not say enough in his favor, for every time one of them spoke of his honesty or his industry, they cried out, 'Most remarkably honest, uncommonly industrious, the very kindest of fathers and of husbands.' 'Oh, the dear adverbs!' cried Mary. 'How good they are!' The justice was strangely perplexed at such contradictory evidence. He was quite at a loss how to decide, when a noise was heard without, and exclamations of, 'Bring him in! Here is the thief! We have got hold of the rogue at last!' The new prisoner hung back, and struggled hard to get away. However, he was forced into court, and he had no sooner made his appearance than everyone was struck with his remarkable likeness to Noun. 'This man must surely be your brother,' said the justice to Noun. 'No, please your worship,' answered he. 'It is true that he is my relative, but only in a distant degree.' The justice then inquired the man's name, and he replied, 'Pronoun.' 'He was not the same Pronoun who so kindly offered to remain in prison instead of his friend Noun,' said Mary, 'I am sure.' No, replied her mother. The pronouns, you know, are a very numerous family, and he was of another branch. The constable who had arrested him whispered to the justice that he had long known the prisoner, and always considered him as a very suspicious character, for that he went by different names, according as it suited his purpose or situation, that he sometimes called himself relative pronoun, at others demonstrative pronoun, and at others conjunction. But to my certain knowledge, said the jailer, his name is that. The adjectives, who also knew the man, came forward and assured the justice that he was a good-for-nothing fellow, idle and profligate, and the adverbs confirmed whatever the adjectives said. Farmer Verb, who had felt so confident of the guilt of Noun, now began to think himself in the wrong. He owned that he believed that he had been deceived by the resemblance, and had taken Noun for pronoun. He asked his sons which of the two was the man they had pursued. They hung down their heads. They knew not what to answer. The justice then arose, and after having summed up the evidence, I will show you the culprit, stretching out his arm and pointing at the new prisoner. That is the man. Pronoun, struck with the astonishment that the justice, to whom he was a stranger, should know his real name, thought his guilt fully discovered. He fell on his knees, confessed his crime, and begged for mercy. The justice said that it did not depend on him either to condemn or to pardon him, that he must be confined to prison to take his trial at the next assizes. The friends of Noun determined to conduct him home in triumph. Accordingly, a procession was arranged. 2 heralds preceded Noun, bearing banners, on one of which was inscribed, "This is a man whom no calamity could injure," and on the other, "This is the man who has been so honorably acquitted." "Well, I cannot conceive who the heralds can be," said Mary. "What is it that goes before a noun, Mary?" "An article," replied the child. "Oh, then the 2 heralds were the 2 articles a and the, and so it was written on their banner." Pronoun, the personal friend of Noun, not his roguish relative, followed, and then came the adjectives and adverbs walking in pairs, and talking in praise of Noun all the way they went. Farmer Verb and his sons followed at a respectful distance, being ashamed of the error into which they had fallen, and a band of music brought up the rear. The crowd of people was so great, and the streets through which the procession had to pass so narrow, that it often came to a stop, and they would have found it difficult to proceed had it not been for the assistance of some constables, who had been appointed to close the ranks when they were broken, and to separate those who thronged too closely together. Those, I think, must be the conjunctions that serve both to separate the sentences and to join them together. "You are right," said her mother. "But then, mamma, the conjunctions, I mean the constables, could only separate the crowd or join the ranks when they came to a little stop. For do you not know that the conjunctions cannot interfere when they come to a full stop?" "They did not come to a full stop, my dear, till they reached the house of Noun, when his children, hearing the sound of music, came out to see what it was. They then ran back to say it was their father coming home with a crowd of people. His wife rushed out and fell into her husband's arms, uttering exclamations of joy. The little ones clung around. The spectators of this happy scene gave 3 loud cheers, and thus my tale is ended. The end. End of Mary's Grammar, interspersed with stories and intended for the use of children, by Jane Marcet. Read by Jennifer Dallman.